I find it fascinating because the space that is being gestured to here is the space of the character. But what the character is wondering about is what's going on in the panels we've just seen, the space that character occupies, its sort of habitat, if you will. But then also that temporal marker, the today, I think is very fascinating. And one reason is because it really resonated with some questions that I still have about Richard Maguire's Here. So I'm going to move on to just talk about that book. And unfortunately, I'm not going to talk because my talk is cued to a lot of slides, so I had to have it written out or else I would just be lost. So, Where Reflections on Richard Maguire's Here. Soon after entering the window of the textual house Richard Maguire builds for us in Here, we may recognize just how profoundly the architecture of place pervades our reading and our seeing. In many ways, Here offers an alternative to the autographies studied throughout my collection, Graphic Subjects, and my most recent monograph, as Kiana mentioned, Reading Lessons in Seeing. Maguire's premise enables a departure from the tyranny of the human altogether, presenting instead a series of images representing various moments of time. The year each image is taken from is dutifully reported in accompanying captions. The year comes to figure as a reading anchor, stabilizing our navigation through vastly disconnected images. Most grounding of all is the image of a corner within the house, the very spot from which all the scenes of the graphic novel are taken. That corner undergoes momentous change over the decades, witnessing history remixed, history as visual melange. By reducing humanity as well as history to so many discrete units of personality, Here presents captivating alternatives not only to comics narrative, but also to the presumed subjects of autography. In its pages, place seems able to possess a life worth telling, a life worth recounting, but not always according to the same standards of human reason or emotion common to autobiography. According to Here, the non-human consciousness of locality makes possible new ways of understanding time and our all too fleeting relation to it, particularly when compared to the fanciful snippets of human experience recollected by the narration. In the mirror that every graphic novel imagines within its panels, the persistent place of Here takes on an iconic value. The image of the place's sense of itself, or its view of itself, surely corresponds to the corner of the house, because it is represented most often the domestic interior or corner with chimney in turn becomes iconic of the work's governing design. Despite trafficking then in the deep past of geological time, Here establishes the 20th century place of the bourgeois home and ownership as essential pictorial personality. The possibilities the book suggests for rethinking the primacy of the human in terms of place are likewise biased, eventually giving way to a decidedly human preference, not to mention a specific regional affiliation, New England and colonial history. This should come as no surprise, as Maguire is from Perth Amboy, New Jersey. The house used as a model for the illustration he has admitted in interviews is his own childhood home. What seems to be the autobiography of a place thus turns out to be the usual autobiography of a person, autobiography up to its usual tricks. But what remains intriguing about Here's fictive decentralization of authorship is the way in which the pictorial narrative prepares readers for the book's eventual retreat from ahistoricism and liberating anachronism. Indeed, Here makes use of temporality as if it were the only logic able to make sense of place, with its non-human ontic timelessness. Even though a spot in the landscape may be said to occupy a different order of time than finite living organisms do, the very structure of the narrative relies upon a deliberate rigidity of time. We see similar manipulations of time, compressions of temporal experience in lyric poetry, a connection which may lead some to classify Here more as graphic lyricism than graphic prose or graphic narration. Contemplating the model of selfhood emerging from Alice Oswald's poetry, the critic and poet Darren Rhys Jones notes how entangled the coordinates of self, object, and place become in lyric modes, producing, quote, a collective version of a historical moment in which biography and autobiography, which become our histories, are scrutinized in relation to nature and thus redefine it as they coalesce into a dramatized autobiography of a place. Armed with this critical fragment, we might leap to the conclusion that here is up to a similar lyrical commingling of autobiography and biography, conjoining a subject-less view of the invariant place in order to reconcile the human and the object world of locale. Collectivity is certainly implied, if not produced, by the graphic novel, since by eschewing the individual-centered narrative punctuated by protagonists and narrators in favor of multiplicity, the panoply that defines even a single place when seen across the vast eons of its ontological situatedness, the text gives us no single entity with which to identify. Instead, we are assumed to become, in the process of reading, more like places than people ourselves. This mirroring is not dramatized in here as occurring between narrated subjects, but across them. Across the threshold of the page, the reader is constituted by the text to experience an assumed stasis, mirroring the unchanging point of view, whose stasis becomes the focal premise of here's unruly narrative design. Indeed, while scrutinizing the text, we may become increasingly aware of our own positionality. We may notice that we occupy a similarly immovable position relative to the views presented and represented. That affect in all its human variation, jokes, curses, boredom, laughter, manifests as an organizing principle of the text only heightens the underlying impression that there is something rather inhuman about experiencing time with the same cosmic indifference one may expect from a corner of a room. This is not to say that such a perspective is ahistorical or apolitical, and indeed I think that is the lesson of here. To be sure, the very appeal of such a narrative means little outside of our current ecological urgencies. Wait a minute. Doop, doop, doop. Yeah, how about there? And yet this is precisely the appeal of the mask in many graphic novels, particularly autobiographical ones. The autobiographical mask, wait, I know exactly where I need to be for that, and why am I so lost? Okay, whoop, sorry. Let me go back. In light of our ecological disasters, and let's just point out what indicates that on this page. You've got another page here where it's the same room, right? We've got someone dying here, and we might backtrack and start threading this together and assume that this is a character we've seen before. And here's the insert of the past, which, it's the trope, the premise, some may call it the gimmick of this narrative, is to overlay these snippets from different time periods onto one page, right? But the one on the top, I think, is fascinating. If this is New Jersey, that's New Jersey in the future. We have to look up there and, hey, New Jersey, I would say that the panoply, which is the premise of this story, makes no sense, is incomprehensible apart from our own kind of awareness, however strong, of an ecological crisis, the approach of what some have called the Anthropocene, right, the age of the death of man.